Good morning, you're watching World News and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. In an exclusive interview for the Polish television's program Dangerous Liaisons, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski pointed out that U.S. President Donald Trump may now be changing his mind about Vladimir Putin.
Every U.S. administration has to learn Russia and the European Union all over again. It seems to me that Donald Trump already has doubts about Vladimir Putin. Let's hope he'll flip the switch and put pressure on Putin to end this war. Of course, we don't yet know the content of the deal signed yesterday, but let's hope it's effective and beneficial for both nations.
The minerals deal between the United States and Ukraine will strengthen the economic partnership between the two countries. U.S. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce told reporters at the White House. Her comments come after the two sides signed an agreement late on Wednesday.
It is a terrific deal. I think that it is, and again, it's the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund, and it involves much more than just the critical minerals. I think certainly what I think Ukraine understands and what we intend is that this is not just a financial arrangement. This is a bonding between two countries that will make a difference for a nation, certainly in Ukraine's situation where they have a friend, and the rest of the world will notice that when you have a friend like the United States and when we are in business with you and in your nation, it creates a stronger national security for everyone involved. And certainly in this case, when it comes to the profits that are generated, that is then reinvested into Ukraine for the rebuilding dynamic that is going to obviously have to happen. It's a time where, as the secretaries noted just a few days ago, as I mentioned to you, as a matter of fact, on Tuesday, that it's time for both of the nations involved in this conflict to come up with concrete proposals about how this conflict ends. And this relationship now with Ukraine reinforces the commitment of the United States to that nation. It's for the world, it's better off. It also reminds the American people and the world that support of another country can take many forms, and that national security can be reinforced in many different ways. And that's what this arrangement accomplishes.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke about the newly signed minerals deal between Kyiv and Washington in his most recent nightly address.
The agreement has undergone significant changes in the preparation process. It is now truly an equitable agreement that creates substantial investment opportunities in Ukraine. Additionally, it will enable major modernization of industries in Ukraine and, importantly, improvements in legal practices in our country. This agreement does not create debt. It establishes a recovery fund that will invest in Ukraine and generate profit here. It is a joint effort with America, built on fair terms, allowing both Ukraine and the United States, which support us in defense, to benefit from partnership. We discussed the agreement with U.S. President Donald Trump during a meeting at the Vatican. In fact, we now see the first outcome of that meeting, making it truly historic. We eagerly anticipate further results from our discussion. It was a meaningful and highly productive conversation, with every minute utilized to its fullest. I extend my gratitude for this and once again thank both the Ukrainian and American teams for their professional work.
U.S. President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have appointed a new interim charge d'affaires in Kyiv. Julie Davis, the current U.S. ambassador to Cyprus, will take over the role.
President Trump envisioned this partnership between the American people and the Ukrainian people to show both sides' commitment to lasting peace and prosperity in Ukraine. With that in mind, President Trump and Secretary Rubio have identified Ambassador Julie Davis to serve as the charge d'affaires in Kyiv during this critical moment as we move toward a peace agreement to stop the bloodshed.
Julie Davis will assume her new role on Monday, May 5th, as reported by the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. In the past, she has served as the U.S. envoy to Belarus. Bridget Brink, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, stepped down last month.
Thanks to this agreement, we will be able to attract significant resources for reconstruction, start economic growth, and receive the latest technologies from partners and a strategic investor in the United States, said Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal about the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. The agreement is intended to accelerate Ukraine's economic recovery and unlock lucrative assets.
When I came here, I said, how much money have we given to Ukraine?
Following months of tense negotiations, Ukrainian Minister of Economic Development and Trade Yulia Sviridenko and U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent signed the much-awaited minerals deal granting the U.S. access to some of the war-torn country's natural resources.
Thanks to President Trump's tireless efforts to secure a lasting peace, I am glad to announce the signing of today's historic economic partnership agreement between the United States and Ukraine, establishing the United States-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky attributes the successful agreement on the terms of the deal to his last week's meeting with President Donald Trump at the Vatican.
It is now truly a fair agreement that creates substantial investment opportunities in Ukraine. This agreement does not create debt. It establishes a recovery fund that will invest in Ukraine and generate profits here. It is a joint effort with America, built on equal terms, allowing both Ukraine and the United States, which supports us in our defense efforts, to benefit from this partnership.
The fund created in the deal will draw revenue from Ukraine's natural resources. The version of the document signed on Wednesday varies significantly from the original deal proposed by the U.S. in February, which fell through after a turbulent White House meeting between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky.
The first drafts were quite unprofitable for Ukraine, but then there was a diplomatic work on the text from both sides, and now the deal which was signed is a good deal for Ukraine.
Originally, the Reconstruction Investment Fund was intended as a way for Ukraine to pay off its debt to the U.S. for the military support it has received since the start of the war. The new agreement does not mention Ukraine's debt and splits the ownership of the fund 50-50, with no majority stakeholder.
The United States will contribute to the fund. In addition to direct financial contributions, it may also provide new assistance, for example, air defense systems for Ukraine. Ukraine will contribute 50% of state budget revenues from new rent on new licenses for new areas.
Despite Ukraine pushing for security guarantees to prevent Russia from invading again, the deal includes no such provisions.
The minerals agreement is the first step to a security guarantee. That's because it's going to take years to get those deposits from the rare earth minerals and thus the profits. So any fund, which is what we have today, with 50-50 control, it's going to be years before you see that money flowing through.
The deal also appears to specifically keep the door open for Ukraine to eventually join the European Union. Ukraine's parliament still has to ratify the agreement and is expected to do so within the next 2 weeks.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said Poland is investing billions in armaments and infrastructure in a Thursday address to mark the 21st anniversary of Poland's accession to the European Union. Tusk assured that Poland is building a powerful army the country hasn't seen in centuries, calling it, I quote, super strong and modern, an army for winning, end quote. The head of government also said that Poland's voice now sounds the strongest it ever has in Europe. Poland is heard and respected, without which nothing can be settled on the continent, Tusk emphasized.
Paying homage to Bolesław the Brave, we're introducing the Piast Doctrine of regional power, the strongest economy, the strongest army, the strongest voice in Europe. We're investing billions in armaments and infrastructure. We'll not hesitate to favor Polish companies on this occasion. Economic nationalism is really not a bad thing. We're creating an army that Poland has not had for centuries, super strong and modern, an army built to win. And Poland's voice in Europe, it has not resounded so strongly since time immemorial.
Mike Waltz, the national security advisor to the U.S. president, will be nominated ambassador to the United Nations, Donald Trump shared on Thursday.
All right, thank you.
The news confirms earlier allegations that Waltz was being ousted from his post. According to Trump, Secretary of State Marco Rubio would serve as interim national security advisor until that position is filled. The announcement follows controversy over Waltz's creation of a Signal chat room used by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to communicate sensitive U.S. military plans to other officials from the Trump administration. Waltz accidentally added the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine to the chat thread. In Istanbul, a May Day rally erupted in clashes as crowds defied a government ban on demonstrations during the holiday. Streets leading to central Istanbul, including Taksim Square, were shut down under tight police control. Local reports say around 300 people were detained. Protesters took to the streets not only to mark International Workers' Day, but also to voice anger over the jailing of Istanbul's mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, which sparked widespread unrest in recent months. May Day rallies took place worldwide with demonstrations calling for social justice, workers' rights, and democratic freedoms. As tensions with Russia remain high, the Baltic Sea has become a focal point for NATO surveillance operations. Belgium, alongside the Netherlands, is currently leading key missions in the region.
Undersea infrastructure, including vital data and energy cables, is now at the heart of NATO's growing maritime vigilance. Belgium and the Netherlands are currently conducting joint naval patrols off the coast of Estonia as part of NATO's deterrence efforts.
We measure the bottom and we've got the object, so everything on the bottom with our main sensors, it shows up. So we can safely check, is everything in order for especially a pipeline or another water cable. High percentage that we will see some difference in to a cable, especially when it's cut or whatever. And what we do, the main thing is make the invisible visible.
Surveillance extends both above and below the surface, combining sonar, drones, helicopters, and radar signals to detect any anomalies near pipelines or data lines.
We are, of course, first and foremost a mine clearance group. This is our area of expertise. But with a little creativity, we can use these capabilities to monitor critical infrastructure.
The ships are not alone. Vessels from other NATO allies are also on patrol, a coordinated effort to safeguard the Baltic seabed.
There are a lot of underwater cables here, especially between Finland and Estonia. The incidents last December also took place in this region. That's why NATO presence here is essential.
Belgium recently took command of a number of NATO's deterrence operations in the area, deploying an additional ship near Estonia, close to where suspected sabotage occurred last year. While no direct link to Russia has been officially confirmed, NATO's expanded presence seems to have had a chilling effect, with no major incidents reported in recent months.
Polish presidential candidate Karol Nawrocki, backed by Poland's largest opposition party, Law and Justice, paid a visit to the White House, where he met with U.S. President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Nawrocki did not hold meetings with the U.S. officials, but he was welcomed in the Oval Office by Donald Trump, where the two posed for a photo together. Nawrocki traveled to the White House to mark the U.S. National Day of Prayer. The ceremony, hosted by the U.S. president, took place at the Presidential Rose Garden. During his visit, Nawrocki also met with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Nawrocki is set to travel to Chicago on May 3rd, marking Poland's Constitution Day. A far-right Polish presidential candidate is under investigation for hate speech after making inflammatory remarks about Jews during a recent live presidential debate. Grzegorz Braun, who is also a member of the European Parliament, questioned Jewish influence in Polish affairs and criticized Poland's relationship with Israel during the debate. Comments widely condemned by fellow candidates and the Jewish community. The Warsaw Prosecutor's Office has launched an investigation citing public incitement of hatred and insult based on religion and nationality. Braun is no stranger to controversy. He is known for his past anti-Semitic, anti-Ukrainian, and anti-LGBTQ+ incidents. On May 6th, the European Parliament will vote on a motion to lift the MEP's immunity for a total of 7 previous crimes. He could now face serious legal consequences just weeks ahead of the May 18th election. And so this marks the end of our news broadcast, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features, and we'll see you there.